this time it is a story by one of the greatest writers of English. His name is Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens belongs to the period between 1812 to 1870. That's quite a long time ago. But he is still recognized as the greatest writer in English literature. He had contributed quite a good number of novels and short stories which are popular among the people who love literature. And some of those very notable works are the Pickwick Papers, Oliver Twist, which probably I will come back to you later on, Nicholas Nickleby, Christmas Carol, very, very interesting story. David Copperfield, that's also a very interesting story written by Charles Dickens. Bleak House, Tale of Two Cities is a very famous novel, and of course one of the best of his works is the greatest among all the works is The Great Expectations. So you're going to listen to a story from a very eminent writer, Charles Dickens. Basically, he was born in New York, but considered to be a well-known writer of English literature. So, I start the story written by Charles Dickens, and the name of the story is The Old Curiosity Shop. This story has 21 chapters. The first part of the story will have 2 chapters. It was a dark, rainy night in the city of London, and the light from the lamp could be seen through the front window of the Old Curiosity Shop. The room that was lit by the lamp was full of old and curious things for sale of all shapes and sizes. In a small sitting room at the back of the building sat a man with a long grey hair whose face looked old and tired. Nearby, a pretty girl with bright blue eyes was carefully preparing dinner for them both. "Oh, Nell," said the old man, smiling warmly at the child. "You are such a good girl, and you look after us both so well. You know that I love you, don't you, Nell?" The child went to the old man and put her arms around him. "Grandfather," she replied, "of course, I know that you love me." The old man's face was full of worry and sadness as he spoke. "You have spent most of your life living alone with me here and looking after me. I am sometimes afraid that you have a difficult, lonely, and unhappy life." "Grandfather," cried the child in surprise. "You are poor now," the old man continued, "but you are a sweet and innocent girl, just like your mother. was. And I won't let you be poor and die young like she did. The time is coming when you will be rich. It has been a very long time coming, but it must come at last. Yes, it must certainly come. It has come to other men who do nothing but waste their lives. So, why wouldn't it come to me? When will it come to me? I am very happy as I am, said the child, who could see that her grandfather was becoming upset. At that time, there was a knock at the front door, and Nell said cheerfully, Kit must have come back at last. The old man picked up a lit candle and went to open the door. When he came back, Kit was following him. Kit was a shy boy with an unusual wide mouth, very red cheeks, a turned up nose, and untidy hair. He stopped suddenly in the doorway to the sitting room, resting himself now on one leg, then nervously moving to the other and then back again, all the while turning his old hat on his head. Nell laughed out loud at the sight of him, and Kit laughed in return. It was a long way I sent you, wasn't it, Kit? Said the grandfather. Did you deliver the letter to Mr. Quilp? Asked the old man. Yes, master, I did, replied Kit. You must be hungry, said the old man, and he gave Kit a slice of bread and meat and a drink. Kit went to a corner of the room and began to eat quickly. Soon the old man said, Now, Kit, it's nearly midnight. Go home, but be here on time in the morning because there's work to do. Say goodbye to him, Nell, and then get me my hat and clock. Good night, Kate, said the child, her eyes full of happiness and kindness. Good night, Miss Nell, replied the boy, and he left the room. Nell helped her grandfather with his clock and followed him to the front door. When he reached the door, the old man put his arms around his granddaughter and kissed her on the forehead. A tear came to Nell's eyes. She hated being alone in that big, dark place all night long, not able to sleep because she was worried about her grandfather. Every night he would go out and leave her on her own. And yet he never told her where he went and what he did. Then he would return early the next day, tired, worried, and sad. Sleep well, he said in a low voice. Be safe, my sweet. I'll be home early in the morning. The child opened the door for him to leave. The old man waited outside the door for a moment while it was closed and locked from the inside. When he was certain that the door had been locked, he walked away. At the corner of the street, he stopped and looked around, perhaps to make sure that no one had seen him leaving the house, and then he disappeared into the darkness. Time to start our story for tonight. We start with chapter 2 of the Curiosity Shop, titled Unwanted Visitors. About a week later, a young man of 21 years of age walked confidently into the old curiosity shop. He was tall and quite handsome, but there was something unattractive about his clothes and the arrogant way he stood. The old man, who was alone in the shop at that time, was certainly not pleased to see him. "Why have you come, Fred?" asked the old man. "You are not welcome here." "No," replied Fred angrily, "but I am here and I will stay until I decide it's time for me to go. I have come to see my sister." "Your sister?" cried the old man angrily. "Ah, you can't change that relationship. If you could, you have done it years ago," replied Fred. "I want to see my sister, whom you are keeping imprisoned here with all your dark secrets. You pretend to love her so that you can work her to death and add a few shillings every week to the piles of money you have hidden away. I want to see her, and I will." "And who are you to criticize me?" cried the old man. "Everyone knows you are a liar," said the old man. "You have wasted everything you have ever been given and have treated your family terribly, just like your father did before he died." "Well, grandfather," said the young man calmly, "there's a friend of mine outside, and as if it seems that I may have to wait some time, so it's better I call him in." He stepped to the door and called out his friend. A young man appeared and began walking slowly towards the shop. He seemed at first to be dressed fairly smartly, but when he came closer, his clothes were dirty and untidy. "This is Richard Sweveler," said Fred, and he pulled the young man into the shop. Mr. Sweveler looked about him with a weak smile on his face, then winked at his friend as if they shared a secret. "Carefully, carefully, that's right," he whispered loudly to Fred, then sat down heavily in a nearby chair. The old man turned to his grandson and shouted, "I suppose you want money from me. Why do you keep asking me for money? And why do you bring
silly people like him here. How often do I have to tell you that I am poor?
And how often do I have to tell you, replied Fred, looking coldly at him, that I know better.
You have chosen your own path in this world, said the old.
Follow it.
Leave Nell and me to work and lead our simple life.
Nell will be a woman soon, replied Fred. And brought up by you, she will forget me unless I come to see her sometimes.
Oh, of course, you don't want her to forget you,
cried the old man.
especially when she is older and riding in an expensive carriage and she sees you poor and hungry.
Ah, so you admit that she will be rich when you die, do you? Replied Fred angrily. But before the old man could answer, the door opened and Nell herself appeared. She was closely followed by a surprisingly unattractive man. He was unusually short, but his head and face were large enough for the body of a giant. Small black eyes were constantly moving. His mouth and chin were covered with a short, rough beard, and his skin was of the kind that never looks clean or healthy. But what added most to the ugliness of his face was a horrible smile, which seemed to be always on his face. It showed only a few brown teeth left in his mouth. His hair was thin and long, and he wore a big tall hat, an old dark suit, and a pair of very large shoes. It was more than enough time to notice these details, because some moments passed before anyone spoke. Nell moved shyly towards her brother and put her hand in his. The ugly little man looked carefully at the two young men and the grandfather, who clearly had not expected this unwelcome visitor. Seemed very uncomfortable, said the short man, looking at Fred. He must be your grandson. But who is that? He added, pointing at Richard Swiveller. A friend of his, but both of them are unwelcome, said the grandfather. Well, Nellie, said Fred loudly, does your grandfather teach you to hate me? No, of course not, cried the child. I love you dearly, Fred, and if you stopped upsetting grandfather, then I could love you more. I see, said Fred, and he roughly kissed the child on her cheek and then pushed her away. That's enough then. We are friends. He stopped speaking and followed her with his eyes until she had left the room. Then he turned to speak to the short man. Now, mister, do you mean me? Said the ugly little man. Quilp is my name. It's easy to remember. It's not a long one. Daniel Quilp. Mr. Quilp, then, continued Fred, you know my grandfather? A little, said Mr. Quilp quickly.
And you know about some of his mysteries and secrets?
A few, replied Quilp simply. Then let me tell him once for all, through you, that I will come here as often as I like, so long as he keeps Nell here. I came here today to see her, and I'll come here again 50 times for the same reason. I have seen her, and now my visit has ended. He turned suddenly to his friend. Let's leave, Richard. Said Quilp with a disgusted look on his face when the young man had gone.
What a shellfish grandson you have,
Quilp said to the old man.
You are such a weak man,
the old man said.
What would you do then?
Then he added with a shake of his head.
Something violent, I'm sure.
You're right there, replied the ugly little man, who was very pleased with the comment.
Yes, I like causing trouble and pain if I can,
said the Mr. Quilp. He rubbed his hands slowly together again and again, still with the horrible smile on his face. Then he moved very close to the old man, and putting his hand into his pocket, he spoke again. Here's the gold you asked to borrow, he said. Brought it myself because it's valuable and heavy. I didn't want Nell to get into the trouble of carrying it on her own, said Mr. Quilp. Of course, she will soon need to get used to carrying a lot of gold, because she'll be carrying a lot when you are dead, won't she? Said Mr. Quilp.
I really do hope so,
said the old man quietly as he took the money.
Hope so,
repeated Mr. Quilp, moving closely to the old man's ear.
Yes, you're right. I am quite a private man,
said the old man. When Daniel Quilp had finally left and the old man and his granddaughter were alone, he put his hand on hers and spoke.
Don't worry, Nell,
said the old man to his granddaughter.
Things will get better.
Yes, I'm sure. I really hope things will get better. She smiled at him, but did not answer. Then there was a knock at the door. She stood up, looked at the clock, and went to the door, saying excitedly, "It must be Kit coming for his lesson." Nell was soon busy giving Kit a writing lesson, of which he had 2 every week. He found writing very hard and made many mistakes, but Nell was a patient teacher. Evening passed quickly as they laughed and chatted together, and the time soon came for Kit to leave. It was not long after he had left that Nell's grandfather prepared to go out all night again, and once more the child was left alone in the darkness of the old curiosity shop. Well, that's the end of chapter 2. It was quite a long one. We will resume chapter 3, titled Fred and Richard Make a Plan.